Helson Nesal sat quietly in his seat by the window, his hands folded neatly on his lap. At 70 years old, his movements were slow but steady, shaped by decades of discipline and routine. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and faint lines crossed his face, lines that told stories of long days, difficult choices, and skies he had once ruled. Outside the window, the clouds drifted like soft white islands, glowing under the sunlight. Helson watched them with a familiar sense of peace. The airplane cabin was calm. Passengers spoke in low voices, some laughing softly, others absorbed in books, music, or sleep. A child a few rows ahead pressed his face against the window in excitement, while an elderly couple held hands, whispering to each other. The gentle hum of the engines filled the air, steady and reassuring. To most people, it was just another flight. To Helson, it was something more. He had not flown in years. Life had slowed down after retirement, and long journeys no longer appealed to him. But today's trip was special. He was traveling to visit his younger sister, whom he had not seen in nearly a decade. Time had a way of slipping through fingers. Helson thought, one day you are young and fearless, and the next, you are counting memories instead of years. As the plane cruised smoothly, Helson's eyes drifted toward the front of the cabin, in the direction of the cockpit. His gaze lingered, there longer than he realized. A faint smile touched his lips, but there was also a trace of sadness. That door represented a lifetime he had left behind. 40 years ago, Helson Nesal had been a pilot, respected, confident, and deeply in love with the sky. Flying had not just been a job for him. It had been his identity. He remembered his first flight vividly. The nervous excitement, the tight grip on the controls, the overwhelming sense of freedom as the plane lifted off the ground. The sky had welcomed him, and he had never forgotten that feeling. Those years were filled with responsibility and pride. He had flown through storms, navigated difficult landings, and carried hundreds of lives safely across continents. Every sound of an aircraft, every vibration, every change in engine tone had become a language he understood fluently. Even now, decades later, that knowledge slept lightly within him, ready to wake at the slightest call. A flight attendant passed by, offering drinks. Helson thanked her politely and accepted a cup of water. His voice was calm, warm, and steady, the kind of voice that put people at ease. She smiled at him, unaware of the history behind his quiet presence. Helson took a small sip and leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Memories flowed freely. He thought of his late wife, who used to worry every time he flew, yet smiled proudly whenever she saw him in uniform. He thought of the sacrifices, missed birthdays, long absences, sleepless nights. And he thought of the moment he decided to retire, knowing his reflexes were slowing, accepting that even the strongest wings must one day rest. A slight vibration passed through the aircraft. It was gentle, barely noticeable, and most passengers ignored it. Helson opened his eyes. His expression did not change, but something within him stirred. He listened not with fear, but with attention. The engines continued their steady rhythm, and the plane moved smoothly forward. Still, Helson remained alert, his senses quietly engaged. Old habits never truly disappeared. He looked around the cabin again. People were comfortable, unaware of any concern. Helson felt a strange sense of responsibility wash over him, though there was no clear reason yet. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was the sky reminding him that once, long ago, it had trusted him with many lives. Helson rested his hand lightly on the armrest and took a slow breath. Whatever this journey held, he was ready to face it calmly. For now the flight was peaceful, the sky open and wide, and the world below far away. Unknowingly, This quiet beginning was only the first chapter of a journey that would soon test everything Helson Nesal had ever learned and remind him that even at 70, purpose could return when it was needed most. The first sign of trouble was easy to miss. A soft shudder ran through the plane, so brief that most passengers assumed it was turbulence. Conversations continued, screens flickered with movies, and the low hum of the engines carried on as usual. But Helson Nesal noticed. His eyes opened slowly, his attention sharpening as his body reacted before his mind fully caught up. Another vibration followed, stronger this time. The sound of the engines changed slightly, not loud, not dramatic, but different. To an untrained ear, it meant nothing. To Helson, it was like hearing a wrong note in a familiar song. He sat upright, his heart steady but alert. Years of flying had taught him not to panic, but to observe. He listened carefully, separating normal flight noises from what did not belong. Outside the window, the clouds still floated peacefully, unaware of the growing unease inside the metal. Cabin cutting through them. A seatbelt sign flashed on. A soft chime echoed overhead. Ladies and gentlemen. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and controlled. We are experiencing a small area of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The reassurance worked for most of the passengers. Some adjusted their seatbelts. Others continued what they were doing, unconcerned. But Helson's gaze remained fixed forward. He had spoken those same words many times himself. He knew how carefully they were chosen. The turbulence did not pass. The plane shook again, this time more violently. A few bags fell from the overhead compartments, and a nervous murmur spread through the cabin. A child began to cry. The flight attendants moved quickly but smoothly, their training visible in their calm expressions. Helson's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. His mind was now fully awake. Then came the sound that confirmed his fear, a sharp, uneven rumble, followed by a sudden drop that caused stomachs to lift and breath to catch. Gasps filled the cabin. A woman screamed. The engines roared unevenly, one louder than the other. This was no ordinary turbulence. Helson leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. His memory reached deep into the past, pulling out long unused knowledge. Engine imbalance, possible failure. He could not see the instruments, but he did not need to. The plane was speaking to him, just as it always had. A flight attendant stumbled slightly as she regained her balance. Helson caught her attention. Are you all right? He asked calmly. Yes, sir, she replied, forcing a smile. Please stay seated. Her eyes, however, betrayed her fear. Another announcement came from the cockpit, this time shorter. Cabin crew, please take your seats. The words sent a wave of unease through the passengers. People exchanged worried looks. Phones were gripped tightly. Prayers were whispered under breaths. Helson felt the weight of the moment settle on his chest. He did not want to interfere or cause panic, but every instinct told him the situation was serious. He had spent his life preparing for moments like this, even if he never expected to face one again. The plane dipped suddenly, then corrected itself. The engines struggled, their rhythm broken. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Helson stood up. Several passengers looked at him in surprise. Sir, please sit down. Someone called? But Helson moved carefully toward the aisle, holding on to seats for balance. His face remained calm, his movements deliberate. He reached the nearest flight attendant, who was gripping the edge of a seat. I need to speak to the pilots, he said firmly but respectfully. I was a commercial pilot for many years. One of your engines may be failing. The The attendant hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and desperation. Asterisk. They didn't tell us much, she said quietly. But things aren't normal. Asterisk another. Violent shake rocked the plane, leaving no room for doubt. The attendant made her decision. Asterisk, follow me, she said. Asterisk as they moved toward the front of the cabin. Helson felt the eyes of passengers on him, hopeful, frightened, searching. He did not look back. His focus was forward, where the cockpit door stood closed, guarding the fate of everyone on board. Asterisk behind that door, alarms were sounding. Helson could hear them faintly now, high-pitched warnings cutting through the roar of engines. His pulse remained steady, but his mind raced through possibilities, solutions, and procedures he had once known by heart. Asterisk, the flight attendant knocked sharply on the cockpit door and spoke urgently into the intercom. Asterisk, inside. The situation was worsening. Helson took a deep breath as the door began to open. The quiet journey was over. The real test had begun. The cockpit door opened to a storm of sound. Warning alarms blared in sharp, relentless bursts, cutting through the roar of the engines. Red and amber lights flashed across the control panels, reflecting off the strained faces of the pilots. The air inside felt tight, heavy with urgency. Asterisk Helson Nesal stepped inside and paused for only a moment. His eyes moved quickly over the instruments, absorbing information with practiced ease. It had been decades since he last stood in a cockpit, yet the space felt painfully familiar, like a room he had once lived in and never truly left. Asterisk. The captain gripped the control column, his jaw clenched. Asterisk. We've lost thrust on the left engine, the captain said, his voice controlled but tense. The backup systems aren't responding the way they should. Asterisk. The co-pilot worked frantically, calling out numbers and adjusting switches. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Asterisk Helson spoke calmly. May I? Asterisk the captain glanced at him, hesitation flickering in his eyes. Protocol demanded caution, but desperation demanded trust. Another violent shudder shook the plane, making the decision for him. Asterisk. All right, the captain said. What do you see? Asterisk Helson leaned forward, bracing himself against the console. His hands hovered just above the controls, not touching, yet respecting the authority of the pilots. He studied the instruments carefully. The readings told a clear story: partial engine failure, uneven thrust, and growing instability. Asterisk. She's fighting herself, Helson said quietly. You're compensating too aggressively. Let her breathe. The captain adjusted his grip slightly, easing the pressure. Helson continued, his voice steady and sure. Reduce power on the right engine just a little. Balance matters more than speed right now. Asterisk. The co-pilot looked at him in surprise. That will slow us down. Asterisk. Yes, Helson replied. But it will keep us in the air. Asterisk. The captain nodded and followed the instruction. Almost immediately, the shaking lessened. The alarms did not stop, but their intensity seemed reduced, as if the aircraft itself had relaxed slightly. Asterisk Helson felt a familiar connection, return a quiet dialogue between pilot and machine. The plane was wounded, but not defeated. Asterisk. Hydraulics? Helson asked. Asterisk. Pressure is dropping, the co-pilot answered. We may lose manual assist, Asterisk Helson exhaled slowly. Then we prepare for full manual control. Asterisk. The words carried. Wait. Manual control meant raw skill, muscle memory, and instinct, things modern pilots rarely needed to rely on completely. Helson had learned to fly in an era where computers assisted less and responsibility rested more heavily on human hands. Asterisk, Captain, Helson said gently. I trained on planes that didn't forgive mistakes. If you allow it, I can guide you through this. Asterisk. The captain met his eyes. In that brief moment, titles and years fell away. What remained was shared purpose. I trust you, the captain said. Another alarm sounded louder. More urgent. The left engine's output dropped. Further. Helson moved closer. Keep the nose steady. Don't chase the instruments, feel the plane. The captain adjusted, following Helson's guidance. Slowly, the aircraft stabilized enough to hold altitude, though it continued to drift slightly to the left. We need a nearby airport, Helson said. Long runway. Minimal weather. The co-pilot was already communicating with air traffic control, his voice rapid but clear. Nearest suitable airport is 40 miles out, he said. They're clearing the runway. Good, Helson replied. That's enough. Minutes stretched painfully. Every second demanded absolute focus. Helson's shoulders ached as he leaned forward, mentally flying the plane alongside the captain. He called out adjustments, small and precise, each one buying them a little more control. The plane shook again, and this time the hydraulic assist failed completely. We're manual now, the co-pilot said, his voice tight. Helson placed a steadying hand near the controls. You've got this, he said to the captain. Strong hands. Smooth movements. The descent began. Below them, the ground waited. As they lowered altitude, turbulence increased, tossing the aircraft like a wounded bird. The captain struggled. To keep alignment. Easy, Helson said. Trust your hands. Don't fight her, guide her. The runway lights appeared in the distance, a thin glowing line of hope. Landing gear? Helson asked. Deploying now, the co-pilot replied. A harsh clunk echoed through the plane. The aircraft dipped but recovered. Helson felt time compress. Every lesson he had ever learned, every mistake he had survived, every flight he had. Command had led to this moment not in the captain's seat but beside it. Flaps, Helson instructed. Gradual. The runway grew larger. The plane wobbled violently one last time. Now, Helson said. Hold her steady. The wheels touched down hard but straight. The aircraft screamed in protest as rubber met asphalt. They were down. The worst was over. Helson finally allowed himself to breathe. The plane slowed along the runway in a long, trembling roll. Smoke rose briefly from the tires, and the sound of friction filled the cabin like a final cry of exhaustion. Then, gradually, the aircraft came to a complete stop, for a heartbeat. There was silence. Then the cabin erupted. Cheers burst out from every row. Some passengers clapped wildly, others laughed through tears. A few covered their faces, overwhelmed with relief. Strangers hugged one another, united by the shared knowledge that they had come terrifyingly close to disaster and survived. In the cockpit, the captain leaned back in his seat, his hands shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. The co-pilot closed his eyes and exhaled deeply, resting his forehead against the panel for a moment. We're safe. We're safe. The co-pilot whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. Helson Nesal stood quietly behind them. His legs felt heavy and his shoulders ached, but his mind remained clear. He looked at the instruments one last time, ensuring everything was stable. Only then did he allow himself to step back. The captain turned to him, emotion breaking through his professional composure. You saved this plane, the captain said. All of us. Helson shook his head gently. We did, he replied. You flew her in. I just reminded you how she likes to be handled. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within moments. Through the cockpit windows, flashing lights painted the tarmac in red and blue. Instructions came through the radio, calm and efficient now that the crisis had passed. Asterisk, when the cockpit door opened, a wave of sound rushed in from the cabin. The flight attendants looked exhausted but relieved, their eyes shining with gratitude. Asterisk, one of them stepped forward. "The passengers, they want to see you," she said to Helson. Asterisk, Helson hesitated. He had never liked attention. Even in his flying days, he preferred the quiet satisfaction of a smooth landing over praise. But this moment was not about him. Alone, it belonged to everyone who had shared the fear. Asterisk, he stepped into the aisle. Asterisk, the sight stopped him. Asterisk, passengers stood in their seats and aisles, clapping, crying, calling out thanks. A woman reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Asterisk, you brought us home," she said through tears. Asterisk, Helson felt his throat tighten. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Asterisk, "Thank you," he finally said. "All of you stayed brave." Asterisk, as the evacuation procedures were completed and passengers exited the plane safely, word of what had happened spread quickly. Paramedics checked on those who needed help. News crews gathered beyond the barriers, cameras pointed toward the aircraft that had narrowly escaped tragedy. Asterisk, Helson sat quietly in the terminal, a blanket around his shoulders and a cup of warm tea in his hands. His hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from the release of tension. A doctor checked his blood pressure and smiled reassuringly. "Asterisk, you're remarkably calm for someone who just went through that," she said. Asterisk, Helson smiled faintly. "The sky teaches you how to stay calm," he replied. Asterisk, the captain approached him a short while later, no longer in command mode, but as a man deeply grateful. "Asterisk, I hope you know," he said, "that what you did today will be remembered." Asterisk, Helson looked through the large terminal windows at the grounded aircraft. Its wings rested quietly now, no longer.